Welcome to Belief Busters Podcast, where we change the world one belief at a time. True transformation happens when we question if the beliefs we hold are of truth, or simply someone else's belief that we have internalized as our own. I'm your host, Rev. Cherie Taylor-Jones, and I'm glad you could join us on the journey. So this is the season of creation. And did you know that there are multiple creation stories? And when I'm talking about a creation story, I'm talking about how the world came into existence. And they come from different belief systems. And every story has a way of explaining what sometimes seems unexplainable. And in our worldview, we probably think that there's really only one creation story, the ones that we learned in our culture. Yeah, well, lots of civilizations have their own creation stories. And so today I'm going to share some of them with you. And as you're listening, what I'm going to invite you to do is check out the level of creativity and innovation in these stories. And while you're doing that, I'm going to also invite you to hold this question. What is your creation story? What is your own personal creation story? Most of us know the Jewish and Christian creation story depicted in Genesis. You know, Genesis chapter 1. God said, "Let there be light." And there was light, and it was good. And then God spent the next 6 days creating everything else, right? So we got the sky, the sun, the moon, the land, the seas, plants, animals, and humans. And on the seventh day, God went, I think I'll take a rest. But did you know the book of Genesis also has a second creation story? Now, when I was in school and I was learning about this, I thought it was just one continuation story. That's how I was taught to me. But in Genesis chapter 2, it talks about God creates the first man, Adam, from the earth, and then breathes the breath of life through Adam's nostrils to create a living being. He also created the garden in Eden for Adam. And God said, you can eat as much fruit as you want, except from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And then when God realizes that Adam's lonely, he helps him out, right? Puts him to sleep, yanks out a rib, creates the first woman, Eve. All right. Now, the theologians suggest that they were two different authors of those two chapters, with two different points of view of God. In chapter 1 of Genesis, the God is described as a distant and powerful deity named Elohim, creator of the cosmos. While in chapter 2 of Genesis, the concept of God is more like a human-like Lord named Yahweh. And the characteristics given to this idea of God is more like a nobleman that's an artisan. But there are more stories. Today, I listened to Jean Lean's talk, and she was talking about the Kabbalah. And it was really an interesting story. The Kabbalah is the mystical side of the Jewish faith, and talking about their own creation stories. So today I'm going to go with the ancient Egyptians, because they have several creation myths. And all begin with the swirling water of Nu. Nu is the name. And Atum, the god, willed himself into being. And then, he had to create a hill, otherwise there was no place for him to stand. They thought it all through. Atum was genderless and possessed an all-seeing eye. She spat out a son, Shu, god of the air, and then vomited up a daughter, Tefnut, goddess of moisture. eyebrow arch here. You may not see it, eyebrow arch. These two are charged with the task of creating order out of chaos. Shu and Tefnut generated Geb, the earth, and Nut, the sky. From China, the most striking creation story that I found was about Pan Ku. And he is hatched from a cosmic egg. Half the shell above him as the sky, the other half of the shell below him as the earth. And he grows taller each day for 18,000 years, gradually pushing them apart until they reach their appointed places. And then after all that work by Pan Ku, he falls to pieces. And his limbs become the mountains, his blood the rivers, his breath the wind, his voice the thunder, his two eyes the sun and the moon. The parasites on his body, humans. And what about all the Greek mythology we read in school, right? We read a lot of that in school. I don't know about you, but boy, they were very confusing. Gaia, Mother Earth, created Uranus, the sky, to cover herself, and they spawned a bizarre menagerie of gods. And these gods were all jostling for position, right? I want to be the ruler of all the gods. And then eventually Zeus emerges, ruler of the sky, as the chieftain of the gods. And then from India, we have the creation in the earliest Vedic text, the Rig Veda, tells about the gigantic being of Purusha, possessing 1,000 heads, 1,000 eyes, 1,000 feet. And then the gods sacrifice Purusha, and his body parts are transformed into the world's elements, and the gods, Agni, Vayu, Indra, are created. And also, what's created from Purusha's body are the 4 caste systems in India: the priests, the warriors, the general populace, and the servants. And then the final creation story that I'll share with you today comes from the German and Scandinavian people, and that's about the North Mythology. In the beginning, there was nothingness. And gradually, the space fills with water, which freezes and then partially melts. And from the drops of melting water, a giant human form appears. His name is Ymir. And from his armpits, a man and a woman appears. Giants like himself, but capable of producing others by more conventional ways. Eyebrow arch. Meanwhile, a cow has licked the melting ice and has revealed another giant, from whom the god Odin descends. Odin and his brothers kill the aged Ymir, and of his flesh they make earth, of his skull the heavens, of his blood the sea, and his bones the mountains, and his hair trees. Now, you may be thinking, wow, these are some really wild and crazy stories. Maybe even making the judgment that, wow, these are really primitive and uneducated folks. But is it any crazier than the stories we believe about our own creation? Is it any crazier than what we believe we are to be in the world? You know, when I was a little girl, my mom told me a story. She said, my dad wanted to name me Sherry, Sherry. But Mom was a jealous kind of gal. And she wondered, was this an ex-girlfriend of Dad's? Well, she was not going to name her daughter that. So to kind of keep the peace, she twisted the spelling of the name. And I always knew that story. And when I was around 13, it was really clear to me that the pronunciation of my name was going to be Cherie, not Sherry. And in this one little story from my mom, I internalized a belief that the incorrect pronunciation of my name was a negation of my true identity. And then suddenly, as I was awakening from that false belief, I realized that my mom's story was not my identity. My mom's story was not my creation of who I am to be in the world. And I discerned that I can create a different spelling of my name to honor my truth. And from that moment, I got to tell you, most folks now, they pronounce my name correctly. There's no longer any resistance to that. And I'm sure a large part of that shift is my claiming my own creation story. How many of these types of stories have you bought into from your family of origin? Maybe you were told you're smart, you're not so smart. Maybe you were told you were worthy. Maybe you were told you were unworthy. Maybe you were told you were lovable. Maybe you were told you were unlovable. Maybe you were told you were beautiful. Maybe you were told not so much. And how many other stories did you buy into from your friends, teachers, bosses? Did you allow these random people to define who you believed you were? And then today, are you still reacting from their views of who they say you are? It's really insidious how the story of creation of the self becomes so ingrained into our psyche that we believe wholeheartedly that someone else's definition of us is true. And then we search out all of the scenarios around us that reinforces that belief. We know as spiritual practitioners, we say it often enough that thoughts held in mind create after their kind. We say it over and over and over, and yet we still choose to hold on to other people's thoughts of us. Last week, Reverend Cindy, she talked about the shadows. It was a good talk, by the way. I did listen. She reminded us that we all have these shadows and that our work is to acknowledge that the shadows exist, do our self-awareness work to make peace and integrate them, and finally to stop projecting them unto everyone we meet. And if we are no longer buying into someone else's erroneous creation story of ourselves, then we no longer have to be afraid of our shadows. Dr. David Hawkins, in his book, Letting Go, writes this: the shadow is all the repressed thoughts, feelings, and concepts about ourselves that we do not want to face. All the stuff that we thought they, wherever they are, were guilty of is equally in ourselves. Thus, when it is brought up to conscious awareness, acknowledged, and surrendered, it no longer unconsciously runs us. Once the shadow has been acknowledged, it loses its power. This, my friends, is why we do this work. It's in the resistance of truly comprehending that each of us has shadows, that these shadows become our internal demons. And in our projection of those demons, we see the battle of the world between good and evil. And it takes a lot of our energy, my friends, to suppress our shadows, to suppress our fears. And it's actually so energy depleting that we're drained. And we don't have the capacity now to fully engage in love, fully engage in creating wonder in our lives. And a huge part of the shadow work is looking at the stories we believe are true about ourselves. Because those stories create an energetic field in which we attract to us those same things. It's a resonance. So if our creation story is of unworthiness, guess what we're going to attract? More things that reflect our unworthiness. While if we've done our shadow work, then our energetic field changes. And now we get to attract things of a higher resonance, a higher frequency. Things like peace and harmony. Like attracts like. Once we allow our shadows to be integrated, we'll stop seeing our shadows in those around us. And then we get to realize there's no us versus them. There is only oneness, and we get to then really step into that practice of oneness, seeing oneness in everyone that we meet. Now, often when I work with clients, they get agitated by my assertion that they can create new stories to replace the internalized stories they received from others. So let's say that your childhood was filled with trauma. Creating new stories doesn't mean that those things didn't happen, but it does mean you get to create new interpretations of the event. What this does is it gives you an opportunity for the same story to have a different ending. Do you see the power in that? So how do we do that? We start by asking the question, what else could be another perspective of the incident that you've experienced? So here's an example. You know, when we're little kids, what's really attractive to us is fire, right? When we're little, how many parents have gone like, oh God, yes, fire, right? So let's say as a child, you're playing with matches and your parents react with punishment, maybe harshness, harmful words or actions. And as a child, you internalized their words and actions to infer that you were a bad child. Now, as children, we don't have the mental capacity to separate their words about us as not a definition of us. You with me? So as kids, each time these things occur, we absorb them. And we say, oh, that must be me. That must be who I am. But here's the thing. As adults, we know that our brains and emotions are now highly developed. And if we do our work in psychological intelligence and self-awareness, we have the ability to realize that there is more to the original story than we thought. More. And from our adult brain and our emotional aware lens, we can see that our parents were probably terrified that their child would burn themselves and destroy their surroundings. You know, something simple like burning the house down, right? So as adults, we can then have the awareness that in dangerous situations, human survival instincts kick in. We all know about the amygdala being hijacked, right? When there is danger. And we've got several options. We know the fight, right? Fight against the danger. We know the flight, run away from it. We know the freeze, where we just kind of go and we're immobile. I also realized there's two other ones that have been recently added. One is flop, to collapse, to pass out, to faint. And the last one is to fawn, meaning that you attempt to appease the threat in the hopes that no further harm will happen. So with this updated information, you now know you can modify that original story. So you no longer have to have the belief that you had as a child that you're bad. Because now, as an adult functioning at a higher level, you know now there was more to the story. You understand now how that survival mechanism kicked in, depending on how they flow, is how they responded and reacted to you. So in our present moment awareness, we can realize that our parents just simply reacted from survival instincts. And their reactions to the incident is no longer a defining moment in our psyche. No longer a defining moment. As adults awakened in consciousness, we have the capacity to bring that child's perception of trauma and then merge it with that new level of understanding to really kind of bring in now the real story. It's an opportunity for us to reparent our inner child. And as evolved divine humans, we are creating new endings for the same story. This is what is really the practical application of, behold, I make all things new. So in this season of creation, I'm asking you, what's your creation story? Are you going to choose to hold on to gender roles, racial biases, cultural narratives that others have subscribed to you? Because if you choose to hold on to those old paradigms, you're going to be reacting from untrue beliefs about yourself. You will be constantly viewing those around you in the somebody done somebody wrong song. You know that one, right? And creating victimization when there isn't any. Or today, you can choose to rewrite your origin story from a new level of awareness. Create the life you truly deserve. A life filled with joy, filled with wonder, filled with possibilities, filled with awe. And my friends, we can do this together. It's not like you're going out there by yourself and you're on a limb. We're doing this together because we know as one life is changed, it changes all around them. So I invite you today, together, behold, we make all things new. If you are enjoying these conversations about assessing your belief systems and how to transform outdated beliefs, then please subscribe and give us a positive review. To support this podcast and its transformative work, you can also become a sponsor for as little as $5 a month. You can reach Rev Cherie at info@beliefbusterspodcast.org. To continue on this journey of evolution, you can also get my book, Turning Your Why into Why Not, at Amazon or any other bookstores, which gives you practical tools to do this work. See you next time on the flip side.